Hello, good people of YouTube. Welcome to episode 35 of What Makes This Song Special, the show where I take a song, talk about why the song's special to me, talk about the song, a little bit about the singer, and then I'll do a part two where I'll cover the song in question. Today's song is Oh Holy Night, the classic Christmas carol, I suppose. My wee story of why it's special to me this week starts in the run up to Christmas 1998. I'd just turned 17 and I was in the last year of high school. Had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life after high school finished and when that chapter ended, other than my extremely realistic goal of becoming a rock star, or the biggest rock star ever to sort of grace planet Earth. Something that I think everybody that I came into contact with, that was what was going to happen, with utter confidence, But I suppose I was never a kid who loved school. I don't know if many kids love school, to be fair, and I feel slightly guilty saying that. My wife's a teacher. I like to think that teachers do a great job of trying to make it fun, but I don't think kids would choose to be at school most of the time, when the alternative is obviously being out playing with their pals and doing what they want to do. So I never really understood folk who loved school. I loved life out of school far too much to ever want to be there for any longer than I really absolutely had to. And I didn't have any kind of terrible experiences at school, if I'm being honest. I was never bullied. I wasn't treated badly at school, so it's not like it was a terrible existence. But I don't think I really enjoyed much of school until the last couple of years. By that point, I think the teachers started sort of treating us a bit more like humans, or a little bit more like adults. And yeah, I think we just got a wee bit more attention and spoken to less like kids, which made school a wee bit more fun, along with other things like just the fact that you're growing up and you're making kind of more developed friendships and relationships with people and stuff. So it was a wee bit more fun. And not all of the departments were like that, to be fair. There were a few really great departments and really great teachers who stood out from the ones who clearly couldn't be bothered being there. For me, it was the music department. Maybe it was because they saw something in me and took an interest in me and pushed me towards goals and achievements that I wouldn't have had the guts to go for myself. But to me, at least, they were one of the only departments who really seemed to care. And that's not to criticise the other departments. There were some great, as I said, there's some great teachers in some of the other departments. But as a department on a whole, I think the music department at Williamwood High School was quite a famous music department. Even people in other schools knew about our music department and the teachers. And it was led by the famous duo of Mrs. Miller and Mrs. T, they were like a comedy duo. They were a sort of Ant and Dec type vibe for the younger viewers out there. And there's a very good chance that I wouldn't be sitting here talking about music as a full-time working musician if it wasn't for these two ladies. They were charismatic, funny, kind, compassionate, and most importantly, they were passionate about teaching people about music. They loved music, and it just, it's sort of, you could see it coming from them. I can't think of the word that I'm looking for, but yeah, they just loved music. And they would come and get me out of boring classes and subjects that I hated to tell me that I was auditioning for a show or that I was singing a certain song in the choir. And shows and choirs were not really anything that I had been interested in up until then. Before all of this, I was into rock music and football. I wasn't a kid who was into amateur dramatics or performing to anybody really. I wasn't one of those kids. I've got a few of those kids who come in for lessons now, and you can just see that that's what they're kind of born to do. They're just very confident and very passionate about musical theatre and panto and all those things. I was never into any of that stuff at all. I just loved listening to music and singing along in my bedroom, kidding on I was playing a guitar. usually a tennis racket or something, until I got a guitar. And I was into football in a massive way, or soccer for any sort of American or Australian watchers. But yeah, all of a sudden I'm singing arias from famous operas and performing in musical theatre shows at school, completely out of my comfort zone. But the teachers, they saw something in me, and their passion drove them to push me into doing something with my talent. That sounds a bit big-headed, but it's everybody's got a talent in something. Mine is singing. And honestly, I wasn't ready for any of it. I think I've said this before in previous episodes. I used to throw up before every performance. I had panic attacks. My anxiety was horrendous at that stage in my life. It really was. It was awful. And yet, it all seemed worth it in those magical moments that I know I would have regretted if I'd not agreed to have done them. Those moments where you've just been so nervous about something for a week or 2 weeks or months, and then you do the performance, you perform a piece or a show or whatever, and the applause comes at the end, and it's that relief mixed with a wee bit of self-pride, and just, there's a whole load of emotions that all performers every performer watching will understand, and not just performers. I think anybody who does anything, sports or even a project at work that you've worked really hard at and you've handed in, there's a great feeling of relief and self-satisfaction, I suppose, fulfillment that you've done something that was worthwhile, especially if it gets applauded in any way. So I just get thrown into that world, and a terrifying world for me, especially as a sort of introvert / extrovert. I can be extrovert at times, certainly amongst friends and things. I'm probably the loudest person in the room, but quite introverted when it comes to, or certainly used to be quite introverted when it came to things like that. So anyone with a story, I'm sitting in Mr. Getty's English class. Mr. Getty, another absolute legend of Volumewood High School, one of the best teachers that I ever had, great English teacher. Anyway, I hear someone say that I've been asked to go down to the office, and at this point I'm trying to work out what I might have done to get me into trouble. A few possibilities are sort of creeping around in my head as to why I might have been summoned as I'm walking down the corridor, and then I see Mrs. T waiting for me. Mrs. T, she's got this big smile on her face, and I felt the relief of knowing that I wasn't in trouble. She'd obviously come to get me to discuss something musical. The relief was about to turn to terror, because as always, Mrs. T had an idea, and Mrs. T had an idea. It was just, there was no saying no, there was no going back. And she says to me, right, tomorrow's the last day of school before the Christmas break. We want to close the year with a bang. I want you to sing in front of the school at the Christmas service. And I thought, oh God, immediately wanted to say no. I really did, but as I said, you couldn't say no to Mrs. T or Mrs. Miller. They had this confidence in me that sort of made me know that they had my back, and that we would get through it. And she looked at me laughing. She knew that it was a big ask, telling me how great I'd be. I asked her what the song was, and she told me it was called Cantique de Noël, and I'd never heard of it, of course. And I'm thinking, oh God, I'm going to have to learn something. I'm starting to realise that she's expecting me to learn this really difficult piece in under 24 hours. And I'm to perform this in front of the whole school. I hadn't even planned on going to school the next day, because I don't know if this is just a Scotland thing or if this is just a worldwide thing, but at school, on the last couple of days of term when it's Christmas time, or if it's the last 2 days of term before the summer, nobody really goes in. You get the kind of keen academic ones that maybe go in, but nobody else really goes in. If you want to be cool, you don't want to go in the last day of school. So I hadn't planned on going in, and I remember saying to her, like, oh God, who sings it? And she says, well, Pavarotti is the version I want you to do. And I thought, of course it's something nice and easy like that Pavarotti would sing, which led me then to ask, what language is it sung in? And she says, the first verse is in French, the second's in Italian, the last verse is in English. Oh my God. So Mrs. T, I don't speak French, you know, and she's like, you'll be fab, laddie. That was what she always used to say, you'll be fab, laddie. So she shoves the music and the lyrics into my hand, a CD with a piece of paper. I always remember there's a CD and the piece of paper wrapped around the box that said, listen to track 14 or 15, whatever it was. And the butterflies were already in full attendance in my stomach. And I just thought, oh God, absolutely dreading having to do this. My only hope, I remember thinking, most of the cool folk at school won't be there tomorrow. They'll skip tomorrow. They won't turn up to a church service. And I kept telling myself that all night as I listened to this song over and over again, trying to get the melody and the phrasing of different languages into my head. And I turned up at school the next day. I remember I ate half a banana because I thought I better eat something, but I knew I was going to throw up regardless, so I didn't want to eat something substantial, knowing that I was going to be sick, because I just could never hold anything down before a performance. So I turned up at school, and to my absolute horror, everybody's in. Like, everybody's turned up to school. Almost everybody. I mean, I was horrified, and I started speaking to people. I was saying, "Why are you here on the last day?" And they were like, "Oh, we heard you were singing. We heard you were singing in the church service, and we wanted to come in to hear you." And it'd become a wee bit like that at school. Like, people, I suppose, not many people sang at school or performed musically. So when somebody did, which was very kind and flattering, I suppose, looking back, people always wanted to come along and see and hear me sing, which was lovely. But at the same time, I just was hoping that nobody was going to turn up. So this huge, extreme extra pressure, finding out that most of the year group have turned up for school on the last day. And a huge sense of pride, I suppose, as well, along with that anxiety that, people wanted to see me. Anyway, I was to meet Mrs. T at the church sort of 20 minutes before everybody got there to go over the song, to rehearse it. Bearing in mind, I've only heard this song less than 24 hours before for the first time. I've not ever sang it. We haven't rehearsed it. I don't know what the accompaniment is going to be like. I thought I was going to faint. We go into this little cupboard inside off one of the corridors of the church, and it's got a piano inside. And I think the school violin teacher was there too. I think his name is Mr. Cairns, I think. And he was going to accompany us as well. And Mrs. T was so excited. She was jumping around, sort of hyperactive, as she always was, asking me what I thought of the song. And she was all excited to find out what I thought of the song. And full of her usual positivity and energy. And I was running to the bathroom to throw up, of course, every 10 minutes. And so most of what happened between then and the performance at the end of the service is a blur. But I do remember looking around the church when the service began, and it was bursting at the seams. There were people standing upstairs, packed in, looking down. There were parents, there were teachers, there were pupils. I'd thrown up everything I had in my stomach, which was, half a banana and some water. And I mean, when the moment came, I remember standing up in front of everybody and took this huge deep breath, and I thought, right, I'm going to either faint or this is going to go all right. And I honestly still get nervous thinking about it. It's like, I think it's like trauma, like PTSD. But one by one, I see people starting to respond. Everybody's just kind of staring and watching, and then I see the odd tear emerge from folks' eyes, and I think, wow, I loved that. I think that sounds quite sadistic, but I love seeing people cry when I sing. It's an amazing feeling. For some strange reason, when people get emotional when I'm singing, it's like this wee victory. I don't know if it's like a power trip, or I don't know, or just knowing that I've transferred my emotion outward to somebody else and they're responding to it. And I don't know, it feels good to see people become emotional when you sing. I suppose that's what, singing is. I've talked about that on the channel before. Like, singing is supposed to be emotive and music's supposed to be emotive. So I suppose when people get emotional, you've done some of the job correctly, provided they're crying for the right reason, of course. But I remember I couldn't control my leg. My leg was shaking so much. I remember just like my leg bouncing I can't remember which leg it was, but I remember like one of my legs just shaking so much that it felt like I was doing that Elvis thing, that Elvis thing when he used to do the leg shake. That was part of his. It was. I don't think it was a nervous thing. That was just kind of part of his stage presence, performance. But yeah, I can't remember how. Yeah, how I got over that. But it doesn't happen anymore, thankfully. And then yeah, so I'm singing the song, and then there's the big, big, big note at the end, which is just this huge note. And I suppose I don't think people expected this huge note to come out of a little skinny teenager. And I absolutely nailed it. I mean, I did. Again, sounds big-headed, but I mean, it was one of those moments where you just know, as soon as you've hit it, you've planned 24 hours of worrying and feeling sick and dreading this moment, and then I absolutely smashed the note, and I just held it and held it and held it. Wee bit of vibrato on it. It just sustained. I heard it reverberate around the church, and I watched people react, and then just this huge applause and a standing ovation, which went on for so long, and I just felt all those emotions that I spoke about earlier on, just the relief of going, thank God, no pun intended that I was in church, but yeah, and I'm not a religious person, but thank God this is over, thank God it went well, and also just feeling you're so happy that, I performed it well. It was an awesome feeling, an awesome moment. And the sense of achievement wrapped up in the relief, as I say, was overwhelming. I felt like, I feel like I'm talking about this as if it was my first ever performance in front of people. It wasn't. I'd done quite a few performances by this point, but there was something about this one. It was a special one for me. The way that it had come out of nowhere, and I had to learn and perform a really difficult song in less than a day. It just felt like a little victory. And I think the fact that almost the entire school turned up, including dozens of teachers and parents, and to this day, my mum still brings this performance up as a real standout one. I think it was like a real turning point for me, and I think she always talks about it being, a special performance. So, and also one that quite a few of my friends still talk about. Sometimes they remember that time, that final year at school, and I think that final year at school is all about being prepared for the big bad world, isn't it? And I suppose those types of things that teachers do, especially good teachers, they push you outside your comfort zone to prepare you for that, I suppose. And Mrs. Miller and Mrs. T were definitely fantastic at doing that. I'm very what's the word? Appreciative of everything they did for me. So that's what it reminds me of. That's the song, Cantique de Noël, or O Holy Night, as it's known more in sort of English-speaking countries. The song actually came about in Roquemort. I don't know how to pronounce French words. That in France at the end of 1843. The church organ had recently been renovated, and to celebrate the event, the parish priest persuaded poet Placide Cappeau, again, no idea if that's the right pronunciation, a native of the town, to write a Christmas poem. Soon afterwards, in that same year, Adolphe Adam composed the music. The song was premiered in 1847 by the opera singer Emily Laurie. The version that I first heard, of course, as I mentioned before, was the Pavarotti version. Luciano Pavarotti doesn't need much introduction, if any, and I'll be honest, a vocal coach analysis of Pavarotti would either take so much longer than we've got, or would be almost sacrilege for me to sit here and talk about the great man's voice. Who am I to talk about Luciano Pavarotti, other than to just talk about how amazing he is, or was, sadly. But I'm going to keep the vocal coach analysis short and sweet for Pavarotti. I don't think anyone's qualified to critique him. In my opinion, the greatest male singer of all time. Effortlessness throughout his humongous range, power, emotional connection, perfect vibrato, breath support that would make anyone jealous, a voice that is instantly recognisable, even in a genre where there's a tendency to sound stylistic. He was an idol, perhaps the last opera singer who would become a household name. He was a sort of rock star of the opera world. The greatest all time, the greatest of all time. I'll put a question mark after that for anyone watching that wants to debate that in the comments, and we can argue about it, and I will argue about it, because I think he's undoubtedly the greatest of all time. I think there are a couple of close calls. Obviously, people will talk about the great Caruso, who was a phenomenon. Jussi Björling, the Swedish opera singer, another incredible voice. But for me, Pavarotti had something that I don't think any other singers ever had in that genre. So that's why I'll argue that he's the greatest ever. But as I said, if you've got a differing opinion, leave a comment and tell me what you think. For me, that's why the song's special to me. Is it the best Christmas song ever? I'll leave again another comment debate if you like. It's definitely one of my absolute favourites. I've got a few favourite Christmas songs, but this one's special to me for the reasons I mentioned in the story. Is it special to you? What's your favourite Christmas song of all time? Leave a comment. I'd like to thank everybody this year for watching. I had a wee kind of moment of, I've wanted to do this for a while, and it's just been, life's busy and I haven't had the chance to really put the effort into doing something like this and having a channel where I talked about music and did more cover versions on my channel. Everything kind of took a back seat. It took a back seat for everything else that was going on in life, and I made a kind of New Year's resolution last year that I would start doing this channel, this little show that I've been doing, and I made a promise that once I started I would do a video every week, and I've kind of kept my promise. I didn't start till about late March, but we're now on episode 35, so 35 episodes and 35 cover versions, so 70 videos up this year. Thanks, it means a lot. Everybody who's watched in 2022, I'm going to try and keep that going throughout 2023. But I really appreciate everybody watching. Hopefully you can like it, share it, subscribe, and we can get a lot more subscribers and people talking about music in the next year ahead. So have a lovely Christmas. Enjoy part 2, which will come up here in a second. And thanks again.